The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Hello, everyone. My name is Haley Cassidy, Americhem's global branding and digital marketing leader. I'd like to thank all of you today for joining today's webinar, Antimicrobials and Fibers 201, which is the second webinar in our antimicrobial series. Today's presentation will be about making fiber applications inhospitable to microbes. All attendees are muted, so please send in your questions through the questions tab, and we will address them at the end of the presentation during our Q&A segment. Today, we will start with a brief introduction of our panelists and who Americhem is, followed by a description of the different types of microbes and how each category of microbes impacts the effect of certain antimicrobial applications. We'll then get into a large chunk of content based on how antimicrobials are used in polymeric fiber solutions and designing the right solution for you in either a compound or masterbatch form. We'll also talk about testing and efficacy measures, as well as real-life case studies that Americhem has worked on. Lastly, we'll touch on what other additives are beneficial for fiber applications and then take your questions. Today, I am joined by Robert Baldy, Americhem's Sales Manager for Fibers, and Roger Threadgill, Americhem's Product Development Manager for Fibers. I will now turn it over to our panelists for them to give brief bios of themselves, followed by the rest of the presentation.
All right, thank you, Haley, and thank you, of course, for all the attendees of today's webinar. We certainly do appreciate your interest in today's topic. As Haley mentioned, my name is Robert Baldy, and I'm the Fiber Sales Manager here at Americhem. My professional background is focused on the area of fiber manufacturing, and this includes my 7.5 years with Americhem, during which time I've worked in concert with my colleagues to provide solutions to the synthetic fiber space. Presenting with me today is one of those colleagues, Roger Threadgill. Roger?
Thanks, Robert. And as you've already heard, my name is Roger Threadgill. I'm the Technical and Product Development Manager for Americhem's Fibers Group. I've been with the company for over 30 years, with the vast majority of that time spent in either designing, manufacturing, or developing solutions for the fibers industry. And thank you to everybody for joining us today, and I hope you pick up some information maybe you didn't know. Robert?
All right, with that, we'll get started with a quick introduction to Americhem. Americhem is a global partner to many of the companies on this call and many others across the globe. We specialize in performance masterbatch and fully compounded polymer products. As a founding principle of our company, we're focused on optimizing performance through innovative solutions, all while earning our customers' trust. This Americhem has done for over 77 years, all as a privately held company. One thing of note as we work through the content is to remember that all the solutions being discussed here today are available globally thanks to the 1,000 very talented people that represent Americhem. Ultimately, our goal here is to transform the way your product looks, feels, processes, and how it endures its unique environments. Making synthetic fibers applicable to more environments is a key aspect of what Americhem delivers. Illustrated here are a few of the major fiber industries that leverage the unique properties of man-made fiber. Many of you in attendance probably represent one of these markets and thus fully understand the exacting requirements demanded by today's consumer. In support of this, Americhem brings over 30 years of experience as an industry leader in this area, offering a wide array of color and additives matched to deliver on the requirements specific to carpet, turf, apparel, nonwovens, and other textile-based applications. Americhem's offerings in the synthetic fiber encompass a number of branded product families that span those many different industries. And while diversity is evident in the wide array of end uses, a unifying need in this space is to deliver affordable innovation that drives consumer preference. Whether you operate in a market demanding a durable, long-term product such as carpet, or single-use ones such as a face mask, meeting or exceeding consumer expectations requires a manufacturer such as yourselves to unify a complex set of variables tracing all the way back to incoming raw materials. A couple of product families shown here will be highlighted later in the presentation, but first, Roger is going to take us through a deep dive into antimicrobial additives, which Americhem broadly offers under the InShield brand. Roger?
Thanks, Robert. What are the microbes we are referring to with the term antimicrobials? Well, that term encompasses a range of tiny organisms that, when they are allowed to grow unchecked, can cause many issues that we will detail in a moment. Algae, fungi, bacteria, and also viruses are all around us every day. The ones that impact textiles most often are fungi and bacteria. But I'm sure the organism at the forefront of everyone's mind at this point in time are the viruses. Viruses were first discovered in 1892 by Russian botanist J.W. Iwanowski in an infected tobacco plant. They can be classified into two basic categories based on type of acid that comprise their genome, deoxyribonucleic or ribonucleic acid. They exist in multiple shapes. Among them are rods, spheres, filaments, and helixes. Viruses invade the healthy cells of the host, whether that be a human, an animal, or a plant, as well as other microorganisms, replicate and assemble until the cell is consumed, and then repeat the process in other healthy cells. As of today, Americhem's antimicrobial solutions have not been demonstrated to show efficacy in textiles, but studies are in progress. Bacteria are grouped into two types, gram-positive and gram-negative. Well, what do those terms mean? Well, that refers to structural differences in cell walls of the organisms. Back in Berlin in the 1880s, the Danish scientist Hans Christian Gram devised a method to distinguish these different classes using a dye. If the dye was retained, the bacteria was deemed positive. If the dye was not retained, negative. Generally speaking, gram-negative bacteria are more resistant to antibodies and, not surprisingly, antibiotics due to their more impenetrable cell wall. Many of these gram-negative and gram-positive bacteria can be pathogenic to humans and other species. Fungi are sources for molds and yeast. They are basically indistinguishable until they begin fruiting, when they manifest as mushrooms or molds that would discolor the fabrics on our furniture or awnings on our deck, or coverings for our cars or watercrafts. Long used as a direct food source, they are also key to leavening in breads and fermentation of wine and beer. There are a portfolio of in-melt solutions that have demonstrated efficacy versus fungi and also bacteria, and we will talk about those in a moment. Some microorganisms are all around us and even inside of us. So if we can peacefully coexist, why need we be concerned about them growing on our textile fibers and fabrics? Well, if left unchecked and the microbes are allowed to proliferate, we can see an array of issues develop, from nuisances like odors and stains to more serious things like nosocomial infections in hospital settings due to cross-contamination of textile fabrics. Microorganisms can cause breakdown of organic residues and perspiration that will lead to fouling of clothing, fabrics, or filtration products. Additionally, colonies of bacteria can transfer from one surface to another and further proliferate. If we can add something to the textile fabric, whether it be a surface finish or an in-melt functional material, we can make that surface inhospitable to microbes and retard the unattractive byproducts that result in fouling of the article. So far, we have looked at the different classes of microorganisms that, when left unchecked, can become at least a nuisance, if not an outright prodegrant to textile fibers and fabrics of many kinds. Now let's take a look at the different factors that are driving the use of antimicrobial technologies. The increase in the use of synthetic textiles and plastics in general is a macro trend that has been in place for decades. As more polymeric fibers are utilized for sports apparel, architectural fabrics, flooring, and other athletic surfaces, the need to protect these products from fouling due to microorganisms is increasing. Consumers themselves are demanding better technology solutions to increase freshness and cleanliness in many areas, whether it's pillowcases, cloth shower curtains, bath rugs, or odor-resistant workout clothing, extending the lifespan or reducing the need for laundering of cleaning or other consumer products can make life a little easier in our fast-paced 21st century lives. As these demands increase, so has the technology advanced to keep pace and provide better performance at a lower cost while meeting the requirements of the technical fabrics landscape. Antimicrobial additives can be separated into two main categories: organics, where you find materials like triclosan of Microban fame, quaternary ammonium compounds or quats, or even plant extracts. Typically, these additives are characterized by broad spectrum efficacy, but they are limited by their inherent thermal properties. Many of them just simply cannot survive process temperatures of the polymers of the engineering class like nylons and polyesters. Inorganic additives are based on metallics, which show different levels of efficacy against different microbes. Antimicrobial activity is inherent to many of the elements in the metals portion of the periodic chart. Many of them, like lead, cadmium, or mercury, can exhibit some level of toxicity to us when in direct contact in the articles we use in everyday life. But materials like silver, copper, and zinc of the transition elements are safe for human contact, as we have been utilizing these materials in some cases for thousands of years. Whether it's silverware, currency, or sunscreen, we have a long history of safely being in contact with these materials. So given that that is true, we have a pretty good spectrum of materials from which to select to achieve antimicrobial activity in textiles. What kind of parameters should guide our choice as we design the appropriate solution? Well, there are four basic questions that we need to consider. One, what is the function of the textile being made? What is the article's environment or lifestyle? What polymer is the textile made from? And finally, what level of performance is expected? It's pretty simple, right? Well, not exactly. Each question illuminates a series of factors that we need to be taken into consideration. So let's take the third question, for example. What polymer are we working with? In that facet of the design problem, we need to consider things like thermal stability requirements, particle size, filament size, optical qualities like transparency or haze. Additional considerations include yellowing or discoloration concerns, UV requirements, impact, dispersibility, and antimicrobial performance in that particular polymer. And that's not even a complete list. Each of the questions unfolds before us just like that. So when we ask the design experts, what kind of antifungal, for example, should we use in our awning fabric, the best answer really is, well, it depends. Once we've designed the textile and selected the right antimicrobial ingredients, we definitely need to demonstrate that these additives are functioning, right? What kinds of textile tests are utilized to analyze antimicrobial effectiveness? These tests fall into two main categories: qualitative and quantitative. Qualitative tests, like the American Association of Textile Colorists and Chemists methods 147 and 174, are pass-fail type tests. Microbes either grow or they do not when exposed to the ingredients in the textile. One of the criteria for these tests is a check for a zone of inhibition around the textile, which means that for some distance around the treated article, we would see no growth of microbes. Quantitative methods focus on the population reduction of the microbes upon exposure to the agent. These results are typically presented in terms of percent reduction or log reduction. A log 1 corresponds to a 90% reduction in viable organisms. Log 2 is equivalent to 99% reduction, and so on. The table to the left shows several of the standard strains of bacteria and fungi with the corresponding test method callouts. Some of the more common organisms for bacteria are staph and cleb, while aspergillus are common fungi that are used for effectiveness screening. Well, now that we've designed an antimicrobial solution, how can the product be used and what can we say about it? Well, there are several governmental bodies that have jurisdiction over this process across the world. For example, the Environmental Protection Agency, or EPA in the United States, the Biocidal Products Regulation in the EU are the lead agencies in their respective communities. Oftentimes, these types of additives have to come in contact with food or beverages. These types of cases are overseen by the FDA and the EFSA. The most important thing to remember when we're talking about marketing claims is that we should not use a pesticide. And remember, this is the classification that antimicrobial additives are managed under. We should not use a pesticide in a manner inconsistent with its formal registration. If we intend to utilize it outside of its designated use, we will need to go through the process of registering the combination of the material and its use with the appropriate governing agency, time and money. That being said, there is an exemption that can be exercised, which allows for the use of registered antimicrobial agents for protection of the article that is being treated. In our example, where we would be treating the fiber used to make an awning fabric with an antifungal additive, could be treated in such a manner. If we use the treated articles exemption, we must conform to rules and guidelines on what language and claims that can be used in marketing the treated textile. As long as we are consistent with the actual product label of the antimicrobial agent or pesticide, we can claim that the product will be protected from things like odor generation, discoloration, or fouling. We cannot make any claims about the ability to kill any organisms that could be construed to be dangerous to people or animals. For example, claims about eliminating or killing staph bacteria are not allowable. Prevention of infections, protection against food spoilage, control of allergens, basically anything that can be inferred as or explicitly states that the product will protect public health is not allowable, unless we go through the rigorous registration and vetting process established by each governing agency. The selection and use of the right antimicrobial solution can yield significant benefits to durability and lifespan of the article we are treating. In fact, the different applications that can benefit are only limited by our imaginations, whether it's clothing, shoes, medical textiles, automotive interiors, or even toothbrushes. Many of the surfaces that we touch every day can be made to be inhospitable to a host of different microbes. If you're wondering about a specific application for a textile, or any other plastic article for that matter, let's have a conversation and explore the possibilities. And with that, I'm going to throw it back to my colleague to tell us about some other types of products that can be used to modify the properties of different textile products. Robert?
All right, thanks, Roger, for that crash course in antimicrobial technology. I'm going to make a bit of a transition now and discuss some other functional additives that can be used to enhance fiber properties while giving some specific application examples. In addition to antimicrobials, Americhem's solutions portfolio includes an abundance of functional additives designed to impart unique and preferred properties to fibers. Before you is a non-comprehensive list of chemistries that can be used in concert or individually to enhance the value of your specific product. The chemistries available offer a manufacturer not only the opportunity to change the appearance of the fiber, but also the way in which it responds to external factors in its environment. Now, I will touch on a few of those specific application examples to further illustrate the use of these additives. Antimicrobial additives have application in a wide range of fiber applications, and indeed at Americhem we have active programs in virtually every market outlined earlier in this seminar. That being said, I'm going to cover an application that is likely not top of mind for many of us. In the case referenced here, the application was large filters used in the ventilation system of poultry habitats. Because this application involved environmental exposure and the existing filters were untreated, users were experiencing rapid deterioration in the media. The primary objectives of this program were to improve filter life while also inhibiting bacterial growth. Achievement of these objectives required use of both in-shield antimicrobial and Enduramax UV additives, and for good measure, the customer requested that the final media be black. Bringing all these technologies together to deliver efficient fiber processing and to achieve the performance goals for the filter system represented a complex design challenge. Leveraging our in-house expertise, Americhem was able to provide a color and additives package that processed well while delivering excellent resistance to bacterial growth and environmental degradation. Next, I'll talk about an application specific for UV inhibitors. The graph on the left comes from a case where we were asked to design a stabilizer solution for a PET construction fabric. The J2527 spec models the irradiation and conditions of an outdoor environment. The customer was looking for the most cost-effective solution for extending life out to 1,260 kilojoule exposures interval. And for calibration purposes, this simulation is roughly equivalent to 2 months in the South Florida sun. The lines on the graph represent 3 different stabilization packages at 2 different addition levels, either 0.8% or 1.5% in yarn. Package 1 and package 3 perform the best in this exposure at the target interval. For the visually astute among you may have noticed the dollar signs in the legend. To help crack that code, noting the dollar signs gives a sense of the relative cost of the stabilization additives. So package 1 adds about 3 times the cost of, package 3 adds about 3 times the cost of package 1. Providing this data to the customer gave them enough information to make the value calculation needed to justify and set direction for the project. Another in-demand attribute is haptics, and while soft seems an easy concept, delivering it in a finished article can be anything but. This fact is driven by a variety of factors such as regional consumer preference, the manufacturing environment, and the form of article, to name a few. To meet this challenge, Americhem developed a family of chemistries designed to manipulate the haptics of an article. These solutions are broadly captured by Americhem's Embrace moniker. This graphic shared on this slide is designed to highlight how specific products fall when considering the intersection of multiple design criteria influencing the use of softening additives. Close consideration of these design characteristics is an important exercise in ensuring the delivery of a consumer preferred article. And with that, we conclude the presentation part of today's online seminar, and I will turn it back over to Haley as she'll lead us through the Q&A section. Haley?
Thank you, Robert and Roger. That was a great presentation. We will now move on to the Q&A portion of our webinar. I will be reading off the questions that you guys have submitted so far and pass them on to our panelists for answering. And just a reminder, as we're going through these questions, please continue to send in any other ones that you have, and we'll try to get to as many as we can. So our first question is your antimicrobial technology based on silver, or do you have a variety of other options?
Roger, would you like to address that one?
Sure. Well, silver is definitely one of the major components that are involved in our offering, but we have a host of different additives that we use. In the inorganic side, you'd have combinations of silver, copper, zinc, and other types of materials. And on the organic side, you've got everything from metal organic complexes into some of the more traditional type things that you might find utilized there. So I think the big message to take away there is there's a whole host of different additives for tailoring antimicrobial technology that would meet some specific needs for each product.
The next question is your N-Shield technology product line USA FDA approved, or what other approvals does it have?
Probably best for you again, Roger.
Sure. well, basically, most all of the additives that we're currently working with, and obviously anything that's marketed, they're already registered materials, and those registrations would hold true in most of the main regions of the world where we operate. So yes, so to answer the question directly, FDA registration, obviously, and then also some various registrations depending upon where in the world we may be offering specific product. But we could definitely offer some specifics about that if there's some specific region or specific solution that anybody's interested in.
Our next question is, we are looking for an antiviral or antimicrobial master batch for polyester staple and filament. What would be the incremental cost to plan for this?
So cost is an interesting question. And going back to something Roger pointed to earlier in the presentation, it depends. We do have solutions, antimicrobial solutions, obviously for the PET staple environment. Typically for a PET type application and the temperatures of that process, you would be relying on a inorganic solution. So you can think metallic, either silver or a silver copper combination. And so as everyone here is probably pretty well aware, those are commodities which are traded as such. So the pricing on the metallic agents can be highly variable. That being said, depending on the specific application and depending on the efficacy that you wish to deliver, the cost can range anywhere. The cost in fiber can range anywhere from as low as something like 15 to 20 cents a pound, all the way up to 60 cents a pound or north of that.
Okay, our next question is, can you discuss bio-based antimicrobials for plastics? What are the options here?
Roger, can you address that one?
Yeah, there are some things we kind of touched on a little bit in the presentation around plant extracts and things of that nature. There are some specific studies that are underway looking at the efficacy of those right now. Again, you're probably talking about something in the lower melt temperature range because these would be limited to some degree. Their inherent thermal properties are just not the same as something like a metallic or inorganic solution. But there are some things available, and anything you think things like peppermint oil and things like that potentially could be something that could be utilized. So again, there are some materials out there, and we have work in process of looking at those and how well they work and behave for this purpose.
Our next question is, how are antimicrobial additives commonly added to fibers? Are you using antimicrobial compounds at the time of fiber spinning, in dope, or as a fiber finish?
Roger, you want to address that one?
Sure. Well, everything that we do is going to be considered in melt. So those would be dispersed materials that are introduced at the point of extrusion or filament processing. There are materials that are available and are out there in the market that are topical treatments that can be put on or patted on products after the fact. And then there are also some different types of materials that would also be utilized that are somewhat of a liquid dispersion that can get added at different points for different processes and different purposes. But by and large, we work with in-melt solutions on the whole.
Okay, the next question is, I have read that that graphene has antimicrobial properties. Do you have experience with this nanomaterial?
We've had some limited work in other applications with graphene. That being said, we have not done any studies on its antimicrobial attributes to date. Roger, you got anything to add beyond that?
No, Robert, I think that pretty much captures it. Yeah, we've worked with graphene in the past, but we've never really looked at it for antimicrobial efficacy.
Our next question is, how many washes will the extract be in the textile material?
So we have actually done a number of different studies on a number of different substrates using our antimicrobial materials and their efficacy through laundering. There are a variety of different test methodologies. Roger could probably quote the specific one, I cannot, but we have seen efficacy up to 50, we've tested efficacy up to 50 cycles of laundering and beyond. Roger, you can tune me up there if I missed anything.
No, that's good explanation there, Robert. There's different types of laundering, quote unquote, conditions, whether you're talking about home use or industrial use. Something like, you know, uniforms and things like that have a little bit more elevated temperatures and different solutions that are added. When you're screening for laundering under different cycles, different durations, just check permanence on the material. So we definitely use that as a main criteria when we're developing antimicrobial products for apparel applications.
So we are at our 30-minute time limit, but we have a lot of really great questions coming in that we would like to still answer for all of you. So we will continue on for another 15 minutes to make sure that hopefully we can get all of these covered. If time permits that you're able to stay on the webinar, please do. If not, we will be posting this recorded presentation on our website by the end of today. I'd also like to mention briefly here how you can ask us further questions after the webinar is over. If you have any other questions, you can certainly connect with our panelists on LinkedIn, but you can also go to the Americhem website and ask us questions through the instructions on this slide that you see here. If you go to the website link displayed on this slide, which is simply the Americhem homepage, you can go to our Contact Us form and choose the form that states I have a general corporate inquiry, and choose the option to send to marketing. I'll receive all of these questions directly and follow up as soon as possible with our panelists. You can take a screenshot of these directions, or we will also be sending out a follow-up email with the directions in the email and a link to the contact page. So let's continue on through here. Our next question is, would zinc or copper-based technology result in any color deterioration?
Roger, you want to take that one?
Yes, and that is definitely something you potentially find depending upon the substrate polymer and or temperatures, size of filament. Are you talking about, you know, natural or white yarns versus something that's colored or topically dyed? So those products are prone to some color generation quite often. It depends upon how they are formulated and maybe what matrix the elemental active particle is embedded in. Can play a role as well. So definitely something you need to consider as part of your design criteria when you're looking at introducing antimicrobial agents. Is what's the big picture, and how is this article going to be presented, utilized in the world, whether it's going to be colored or natural. So good question.
Our next question is a turf-related question. What product would you recommend for field owners who are opening up for students/athletes after COVID-19? Would you recommend a one-time use before events or a protectant and shield-like product?
So that question is asked frequently for a multiple of different applications, not just turf. Obviously, the benefit of using a durable application such as InShield, where you put the antimicrobial inherent in the fiber, is going to provide you with a long-term solution that is going to enable continued efficacy against the antimicrobial and bacteria. So typically we would recommend a more durable solution and use the in-melt approach, and particularly for the application where there's going to be a high amount of wear, such as a athletic field, we would say that would make the most sense. To be fair, we haven't done studies on the efficacy or long-term lasting effects of a topical in turf. We haven't looked at that specifically, but we can say that using that in-melt solution would provide you with a durable long-term solution.
Our next question is, do you have antimicrobials for high temperature polymers such as PA66 or PEEK?
What do you think, Roger?
Well, I think some of the grades of the, and especially in the inorganic space, could potentially hold up well, especially in something like process temperatures for 6.6 and polyester, and even also up into some of the more elevated temperatures, things over 300 degrees C. I think there's potential for some of these to hang in there and be functional in those environments. So it'd be something interesting to look at. We haven't really done anything in PEEK or any of those high temperature resins like that to date. So if you have an interest, we'd love to talk to you about it.
Yes, and I believe our engineered compounds group can certainly speak to that with their experience in PEEK. So our next question here is there any antimicrobial effective for polypropylene face masks? How fast are they going to act?
So we do have antimicrobial technologies that are applicable to polypropylene, and a polypropylene face mask is going to be a nonwovens construction, which we have product lines that are active in the nonwoven space. As far as how quickly those materials will act, the functionality is dependent on contact. So when the bacteria comes in contact with the antimicrobial agent, that is when the effect starts to take place. So typically for antimicrobial and bacterial inhibition, there is a growth timeline, and the antimicrobial starts to act as soon as that contact takes place. So in a face mask application, that you would see efficacy there, but it would the exposure is probably a short-term versus a more long-term type exposure. I don't know, Roger, if you have anything to add there.
Yeah, I think just it may be worth at this point distinguishing a little bit about times as far as activity goes and how you look at it based on the organisms that you're talking about. You're typically for fungi and bacteria, you're going to measure say log reductions or percent reductions in colonies in probably hours to days. For viral efficacy, you're looking at minutes to hours. So for something to have an effect on the viral population, it needs to have a pretty rapid functionality and a pretty rapid kill, if you will. Typically for bacteria and even fungi, you're talking about a little bit longer exposure times. So more retarding that growth more than anything else. So I think that was worth noting as we kind of had that question. That's a really good question.
Our next question is there any additive to reduce the luster of fiber such as nylon along with the antimicrobial package?
Roger, you want to take that?
Yeah, sure. Some of the antimicrobial agents themselves that you would use in nylon are going to have and bring some degree of delustering capability along with it. Those will also go very well and be used in conjunction with a typical delusterant type material, something like a titanium dioxide, for example, could readily be incorporated in the same fiber matrix without impeding any of the efficacy for the antimicrobial activity, or also giving you any kind of detriment for your delustering that you're looking for to make that fiber look a little more natural. So let's say yes, that those two things can work in concert and be used together.
Our next question is, are you currently performing antimicrobial efficacy testing against viruses? What standard method do you suggest?
So that testing is in process. We are actually testing, a question earlier asked about PET fiber. We are testing it in a PET fiber application, but obviously the testing would translate to other polymer systems as well. We anticipate having the testing data back within a couple of months' time. As you might imagine, the interest in antiviral testing is very high, and there are only a few labs globally that provide that service. So the backlog is quite high at the moment. But we do anticipate having that data back probably late summer to early fall. With respect to test methodology, there was a recently published standard or test method. Roger, you may be able to rapidly recall that, but we can, if you have interest in conducting antiviral testing, we can partner with you to have that testing completed with some of the labs that we are using today.
Okay, our next question here is from a European company. They're asking, what is your response to the EU BPR changes? How will products be protected in the future in the EU?
Roger?
Well, don't have it readily at hand here what specific changes that the questioner is referring to, but as definitely the landscape changes on the regulatory side for a host of different reasons, we have to maintain our due diligence to make sure that we stay in compliance and also help communicate forward with all antimicrobial technologies that we provide. We provide letters that also provide a reference to the labeling on specific antimicrobial agents being used, which are always up to date and up to speed with the new regulatory requirements that are placed in this space. So again, I don't have the specifics on that in front of me, but that's definitely something that our process-wise we stay on top of, and we communicate that information directly with the customers we work with in this space.
Our next question here is, do you have an antimicrobial for anti-algae in outdoor furniture applications?
Roger, you want to take that?
Yeah, there's several of the materials that we utilize for antifungal, anti-algae type applications should show some good efficacy there. I can't recall where we have specifically looked at a type of algae and did any sort of testing on that. I can go back and look at the history of what we've got and see if I can find some specifics around an organism and its relative efficacy versus algae specifically, but would anticipate that some of the anti-fungal additives are going to function very well for that purpose. And we'll double check that and get back to you.
So this will be our last question here since we are at 45 minutes. It is, can you also do odor testing or odor reduction in your labs?
We can also conduct that testing. Typically, for the different, depending on the different industry, there are a variety of different approaches to odor testing. So we would need to partner with you, obviously, to understand the specifics of exactly how you look at odor. And then we could work with either we have some capabilities internally in our internal labs, and then we have partners globally that we can use to conduct external testing as well. So once we understood exactly the application better and the odor efficacy region that you're interested in, we could help facilitate that testing for sure.
Okay, so that wraps up our Q&A portion of the webinar. I'd like to thank our panelists for their time today. I'd like to thank our attendees for joining Americhem in this important discussion about antimicrobials and fibers. So thank you again for attending our webinar today, and that concludes our presentation.
All right, thanks so much, Haley, and thanks everybody for attending today.
Absolutely. Good job, and thank you for the good questions too at the end.